Welcome to the Mold Matters Podcast. Whether you are looking for help recovering from mold illness or just want to learn more about creating a safe environment for your family, this podcast is the place for you.
Yeah, that the pressure, negative or positive air pressure on a home. So you talked about, obviously if it's negative, that means it's kind of
It's a vacuum.
your inside is the vacuum, right? It's pulling in from the outside.
Your door's going to slam shut when you open it.
Yeah. Now, is there an ideal pressure you want on your home, and what is that?
There is. The ideal pressure would, and some of this depends on where you live in the country, but ideal is either balanced, where it's zero, or it's a little bit positive. And if you're going to a hospital, almost all of their surgical centers in that hospital is under positive pressure. And the reason is because they want to blow the microbes out, believe it or not suck them in.
Right.
So
just blow them out to
pressure,
the waiting room.
That's right. Yes. That's right. Where we're sitting waiting on our sick patients. I think a little bit under positive pressure is a good idea. That's not always easy to accomplish, and it's got to be done right from the beginning. But balanced is what my goal has always been, and that's what I did in my house, was to make sure that it was absolutely zero balanced. And so then if it does go under negative pressure, when you turn on a bathroom fan, or you turn on the range hood, or you turn on the dryer, anything that's going to suck air out of the house, now is pulling fresh air in through that fresh air makeup. So that's what I think, from my humble opinion, is what we really want, is just a balance of not negative or positive.
So Doug, is it safe to give this advice to people who they don't want to spend a lot of money, but they want to know, is my house positive or negative pressure? If you turn off all of your appliances in your home, your HVAC, everything off, and just open your front door with everything else closed, that probably should not want to open farther, or probably should not want to close. Would that be accurate, you think?
I think that is accurate. Unfortunately, though, Mike, I think a lot of the times a negative pressure or positive pressure is as a result of the HVAC system.
Yeah.
And it actually running. And so if it's sized improperly, then it can put the house under negative pressure or under positive pressure, where if it were turned off, you might end up with just a balance, zero.
Right.
So sometimes it's the biggest contributor, especially if it's sized improperly, the biggest contributor to creating that pressure differential.
So it's the size of the HVAC unit that contributes to the positive or negative pressure. Is it also the amount of returns versus supply registers? Does that play into it? So it's kind of an equation of those things combined. I can see how that could get kind of complex. I don't know how to, I wouldn't be the one you'd call to say, help me fix my pressure per se.
Come balance my house, Jared.
Balance my house.
Yeah.
But I can imagine it being complicated. Like, I need to figure out if you got the right size first. Yes. And then, okay, maybe you only have one return, and I don't know.
And where is the return located? And
it is a complicated process, but fortunately there's a lot of science behind it. And unfortunately, a lot of HVAC guys don't know that this exists. But you probably remember in my book, what I did for my house was I hired a mechanical engineer, and it only cost me a couple of $100, but he ran what's called a manual J and a manual D. The manual J calculates the load calculation on exactly what size air conditioning system you need based on that house, that specific house sitting on that specific lot. That's the manual J. And then the manual D designs the ductwork. So when you do that, now you're kind of in the commercial arena. They always do that for commercial environments.
Yeah.
They just don't typically do it for residential environments. But that's how you solve the problem that you're talking about. Retrofitting is not easy. If you have a house that's under positive pressure or under negative pressure, it can be done. It's just not easy. It's not nearly as easy as to do it from the start, which is another one of those unintended consequences. I saved a few $100 because I didn't hire a mechanical engineer. Now I got to deal with the consequences the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's
Hey,
move.
let me ask one more thing that keeps sticking out in my mind. On this house I talked about in California,
Oh yeah,
it was a fairly modest, just a Rambler house, one level,
Yeah.
but they had just a ginormous air conditioning unit on the outside.
Yeah.
Is that as big an issue as an undersized or oversized furnace itself, or how does that play in? Is it the furnace you're looking at, or is it the air conditioner, or both?
Yeah, it's actually the air conditioning, the sizing of the air conditioning system itself, I think is probably one of the most neglected areas addressing indoor air quality. And
Yeah.
the way I think about it is this way. If it's oversized, an air conditioning system is primarily designed to dehumidify, to take moisture out of the air. That's what it's primarily designed to do. If it's oversized, then it's going to short cycle and it's not going to run long enough to get the moisture out of the air. So you got a moisture problem.
yeah,
On the other side, if it's too small, it's going to run and run and run and run and run and never get the moisture out of the air. So you've got the same result, which is what you and I deal with all the time, mold. You've got the same problem on either side. If it's undersized or oversized, you're going to have a moisture problem.
Yeah.
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 So in that crawl space example that Mike gave, because that's technically not, a living space usually. And so, that's almost a whole nother deal, right? Because the HVAC system, if it's not plumbed, down into the HVA or down into the crawl space, you've got the living space that, say you get that under a neutral or positive pressure, that crawl space could have its own dynamic in and of itself, right?
Absolutely. Yeah,
And
absolutely. It's an artificial environment. Yeah, it's an artificial environment, Jeremy, almost like your attic.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
your attics are typically much hotter than it is outside, right?
yeah,
It's like your crawl space is much much wetter than it is outside. So it's an artificial environment that's creating problems. And now if that's not sealed off and isolated from the conditioned space, from the living space, then you're going to have all kinds of issues inside.
yeah. I'm just thinking, if is there any way? Because we've talked about this in the podcast, how often that moldy crawl space, causes issues inside the living space, right above it. I mean, it's just impossible to keep the mold and contaminants from coming up. Stack effect, or maybe it's pressure issues. I'm not sure what it always is, but is there any way to mitigate that? From pushing up into the house? And what do you suggest there?
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I think so. Here's a concept. I know you'll really like this. You'll grab onto this, but we always tell our guys when we're training them that, especially on the assessment side, if they're doing mold assessment, they need to go to a subdivision somewhere where they're building houses and look at those houses and the crawl spaces under construction and see how many holes there are in the floor. Holes for plumbing, holes for electrical, holes for the tub,
Yeah.
And if you don't seal those up, what's going to happen? All that stuff in the crawl space is going to come up into the environment.
Yeah.
So yes, it's not an easy task retrofitting, but what we think in terms is you really only have two choices with a crawl space. You either isolate it from the conditioned space, which means sealing off that floor and subfloor in some way so that crawl space is truly outside air and not contaminating the inside, or you incorporate the crawl space with the living space and make it conditioned space so that now you've sealed it from the outside and it becomes part of the air that you breathe. And that's the concept of a conditioned crawl space, where you've got the floor sealed, you've got the perimeter wall sealed, and now what you're doing is you're essentially air conditioning the crawl space.
Right.
Yeah. And the other thing I thought about was the vents in the crawl space. I think that's incredibly important. This house did not have vents that I'm talking about. We had them cut vents and then go back and treat the house one more time. And she's back in the house now. But that crawl space had no vents.
Well, and that's something we talked about too, because here in Utah where we're dry, it really in most cases is a great idea just to get ventilation in that crawl space because it's dry air.
Right.
But we talked to some of our guys in the South and they're like,
Well, that makes it
No,
worse. Yeah.
that makes it worse. You're just inviting all this humid air into the house.
Yeah.
So I know some
Yeah.
of that's regional, like you're saying, and probably
That's right.
situation specific to.
So what do you recommend down in like in your area, Doug, down in
Yeah.
Louisiana? Do you recommend
For crawl
vents?
space
Yeah.
vents or
Yeah, we highly recommend that it be completely a part of conditioned space, a part of the living environment, that you
Okay.
isolate it from the outside. Um, yeah, I think the problem is, like you said, in the South, you're dealing with 80+% relative
Yeah.
humidity outside. You
Yeah.
can't get enough vents to get
Yeah.
that air exchange underneath the
Right.
crawl space.
Yeah.
Even if it's on pilings, it's really hard to get the air moving underneath that crawl space and getting rid of the moisture. So what we always recommend is, if you're going to have vents, which some people are not going to go the conditioned route, if you're going to have vents, then you need to figure out a way to isolate that floor, somehow seal it
Yeah.
underneath, so that you're not bringing those contaminants indoors.
Yeah.
I see. And sorry to go back to the sealing up the cracks and stuff in the subfloor and flooring between the crawl space and the living space, but is that not standard protocol for a construction a contractor, or is that something you need to request if you're building a home? Or
Well, I'm sure that's probably a regional thing as well. I'm sure there are probably some municipalities where they require that, like I said in San Antonio, where they're requiring blower door testing. That would be part of things that they would require as their local code. But
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons why I wrote mold-free construction, Jeremy, because I think a lot of things are different in different parts of the country. Some places they will allow things where they wouldn't allow things in another part of the country. Short story, I built a house for a friend in Atlanta. I was actually living in Florida at the time, had a Florida license, had all my licenses in place. It was actually Rome, Georgia. It wasn't Atlanta. I went to Rome, Georgia, was going to build this 3,000 square foot house for this guy. I went up there in a suit and tie, took all of my licenses and all my credentials, sat down with the guy that was going to approve the drawings. And he said, "You ever built before?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, okay, well, you can build this one." I said, "Don't you want to see my licenses?" And he said, "No, son, if you don't build a good house, you'll never build another one here." And so,
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah. So, different parts of the country do different things in regards to minimum standards.
Well, in different
Yeah.
parts of the world also. I was just on the
Yeah.
phone conversation with one of our licensees in Australia. And he
Yeah.
said it's unbelievable in Australia what they get away with,
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I want to just talk about a couple more things, Doug, while we have you. I know your time's precious, but kind of, we're talking about air infiltration. We haven't talked about water infiltration too much, but the air coming into our homes can bring in contaminants. If you do it right and filter it, that fresh air makeup can be a good thing. Mike talked about commercial settings. It's pretty common practice, am I not mistaken, in commercial facilities to have some kind of fresh air makeup coming in?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's required by code.
Yeah.
It's required. Yeah.
Maybe let's talk about that for a second. Why is that? And then why is it different in residential, or why is there that difference there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll tell you what, it's like a question of the ages. It used to be back in, again, going back to the 70s and 80s, one of the big changes that they made in regards to these energy concerns was that they lowered the amount of fresh air that was required to be brought into a building. Prior to the 70s, they actually had a standard for commercial buildings, how much had to be made. And there were suggestions at that point that maybe they should actually do that with residences. And then because of the energy crisis and on the commercial buildings, they lowered the amount of air that was required to bring into the outside. Then the discussion from an international building code standpoint was, well, do we even really need to address it on residences? And so it never really got addressed. And it's a little frustrating to me, because even though now it's required on commercial, it's not required on residential. On commercial, the manual J, the manual D I was talking about, that's required, but it's not required on residential.
Interesting.
So I don't know all the politics. I hate to
Yeah.
use that word, but I don't know all of what went into those kinds of decisions, but it's certainly not the way I think that houses should be built, because you can, again, mitigate a lot of problems by doing some pretty simple things.
Yeah. So you'd be a proponent of getting that more in the residential setting where you can get more fresh air in there, as long as you can filter it, right? Filter it.
Absolutely.
Make sure it's got.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think, of course, my view of this whole thing from my book and the standpoint of the construction side of the industry, my whole view of this is looking at the house holistically. It's a living, breathing organism, and you can do one thing and screw something else up.
Yeah.
So what you need to do is you need to think in terms of, how does this whole thing work together as a system? And I think that's the really important steps that need to be taken when somebody is either building or retrofitting.
So let me just, I know this next question could be a whole nother podcast. In fact, we're planning a podcast.
I know where you're going with this already.
Okay.
Yeah. You're going ERV, HRV?
Yeah. ERV, HRV. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm a believer in certain situations. Again, I think it's kind of you have to look at the holistic view of that particular environment and find out whether or not that actually works. If you're retrofitting, they absolutely, I think, have a place. If you're wanting to go to a positive pressure environment, or you want to go to neutral pressure, those kinds of things really work. I think that, again, it's almost, I don't want to say case by case, but it's almost, that's kind of the way I view it. So in the HVAC industry, they call those appurtenances. They're things that you add on to the air conditioning system, just like a dehumidifier. I'm not a big believer in adding dehumidifiers to the HVAC system. I think if the house is designed properly and you have a manual J and a manual D run on the house and is sized properly, you should never need a dehumidifier.
Right.
A dehumidifier is kind of a Band-Aid,
Yeah.
And I kind of feel that way about ERVs. It's like, I can see a place for them, but it would be under certain conditions.
Just, and we don't have anything but just a little bit of anecdotal experience with these. My personal opinion is I think you need to be careful with these things, because I think you can build up a mold load within the core of that thing.
Yeah,
absolutely.
We have a house we're dealing with right now, and it's very moldy, or it feels moldy. We're picking up mold on tests, and there's no sign of it in there. And then we kind of dissected the ERV the other day, and it just felt
awful.
Awful in there.
Yeah.
And
once
so
we opened it, in fact, once we opened it, I started getting physical symptoms. Like it was not good.
And so again, we're kind of on the beginning end of the journey. We've researched it quite a bit on the internet, but we haven't, all we have, like we said, is just a couple experiences with some customers. And so we're trying to figure out, but I like what you said. I mean, if you figure out the right, system and size for the house, maybe that's the better way to go than trying to get.
And every case is its own deal.
Yeah,
you can't.
Tell you a quick story about an interesting HVAC system that I saw? I'd never seen this before. I went out to an oil rig, BP oil rig, and it's about 6,000 square feet. And one air conditioning system cools the entire rig, 320 rooms, individual rooms. And at the end of every single duct run to that room, at the grill going into the room was a VAV to control the volume of air going into that room and the temperature. So every single room had its own thermostat. Now they had a computer running this thing that took up a whole room. But the point is that when somebody went into their room to sleep and they wanted it 65 degrees, they could have it 65 degrees and the person next to them have it at 72 degrees. So that particular appurtenance, that piece of equipment, you can imagine throughout that entire rig, every single one of those was unbelievably contaminated with mold problems because they all have a coil. They all have fins to direct the air. And it was just a massive cleanup job. And so you're exactly right. I think that's the kind of thing you're looking at. Now, in that environment, they didn't have a choice. They had to do that because of the way the thing was constructed and what they wanted to accomplish in terms of keeping the rooms separated. But my goodness, what a major problem, mold issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So kind of our last question then, Doug, what, you know, let's maybe talk. I know you're in the, you're the founder and CEO of NORMI. You also have gotten into the air filtration industry, because obviously that fits really well with what you do with air quality. So maybe let's kind of conclude with talking about what can you do to mitigate your air quality infiltration issues. You could, I don't know if you want to mention air filtration or any other ideas you have for people that we haven't mentioned.
Yeah, I would. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm going to put the chicken before the egg here.
Okay.
Actually, I got into the indoor air quality air purification equipment business prior to NORMI. I got involved in that actually in 1996. And that's when I wrote my book, in the late 90s. And so I was actually selling and designing air purification and air filtration equipment before the turn of the century, as they say. And then NORMI was created in 2004. And so it obviously only made sense as we were doing training on mold remediation for our guys. They would say, well, what kind of air purifiers should we use? And what kind of air filters should we use? Well, why is that important? And it was a really easy connection between NORMI, which was the training and certifying agency, and Best Living Systems, which was our products company. And of course, full disclosure, I own both. But we do a lot of really cool stuff with air purification. We've got some really unique trademarked, patented technologies that nobody else in the country has. And what's cool about that, Jeremy, and I think what's really important to this discussion is that we were talking about mitigating air infiltration and moisture intrusion problems. They can't be 100% mitigated. I mean, I have air purification technologies in my house, obviously, and air filters, good filters. So every time you open the door and walk in from the outside to the inside, we're like Pigpen. We're bringing stuff in behind us.
Yeah.
And so you're no matter what you do in terms of effectively dealing with air infiltration and moisture intrusion problems, you've still got the everyday contaminants that we're dealing with, the flecking off of our skin and odors that we get from cooking and all those sorts of things. So we're big believers in air purification and air filtration technologies, high-tech stuff, and that's what Best Living Systems is all about. And I appreciate your giving me an opportunity to talk about that because it's some pretty cool stuff. We just won a honorable mention innovative award from ASHRAE on some of our air purification technology. So it's a big deal. And of course, our members have opportunities to make those available to their clients where it seems to fit.
Yeah. Yeah. We've began using some of your Best Living Systems products, and I'm a big fan. I think it's a great addition to what we do in our work, especially with,
one concept that we've always tried to share with our customers is after we're done, we want to make this home very inhospitable to mold. And that's kind of the idea there. Just arm your home.
Yeah.
That mold does not like to hang around in there.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, that's why we get along so well, man.
I know it. We're kindred spirits. We talked about that. Yeah.
I know. I've been saying for years, when we tell our remediators and our assessors to go out and do mold projects, it's not just about fixing the problem. It's about fixing the problem and then making sure you're creating an environment in which that problem is not going to come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, that's way beyond just a hit and run kind of approach that a lot of these guys take.
We had a guy come to one of our conferences and he was speaking about how to get repeat customers. And we were like, no. We don't want repeat customers. We didn't do our job if we have a repeat customer,
That's right. That's exactly right. We
Yeah.
do it right. We don't have to have them come
Right.
back to
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, exactly.
So
We could do a whole nother podcast on some of the cool
let's do
technologies.
in a while.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe if you want to come back again, Doug, we could do one even on the PCO technology, because we've mentioned it here and there, and I think it's kind of an exciting thing. And I guess I will say this is a caution I always have to make, because I do run into a lot of people who think that they have a legitimate mold issue in the home. and they mistakenly believe if I put this device in my home, that's going to fix my mold issue. You know, you have, there's a couple step process. You got to really mitigate the mold or do a really comprehensive sanitization protocol like we do.
Mm-hmm.
And then
right.
that second step of putting in some air filtration devices or some of this PCO, photocatalytic oxidation technology, and some of the ionizers that you guys have come up with and probes and things. I think it's a very anyways, it's just a great way to, like you guys have said, to make the home inhospitable. If you'll come back, we'll have you tell us all about it. But for now, Doug, every guest we have on the show, as a token of gratitude, we let you kind of advertise for yourself. Maybe mention some websites, or if anyone listening wants to know more about NORMI or Best Living Systems, how do they get in contact?
Well, thank you very much, guys. Love working with you, and look forward to many years of fixing people's unhealthy homes, which is kind of exciting to do. So NORMI, our simple website is www.normi.org. NORMI.org. Very simple. We've got a great staff of people that can answer your questions if you email us or call us directly. That's pretty easy to do. Best Living Systems' new website is blsproducts.com. blsproducts.com. And we just put in place, in fact, introduced last week, a new affiliate program for guys who want to build a team of people to sell some of these products and represent that company, some of the neat stuff that we're doing there. But that's where it is, and we're just happy to help. Thank you for the opportunity to kind of blow our horn. We think we've got something that's unique and something that is definitely needed. We always say that we're all about helping people have cleaner, safer, and healthier environments. And I think when you look at these multifaceted problems and you've got a multi-strategic solution, you're on the right track. And that's what we're trying to do.
And let me just say in conclusion, because parts of the mold remediation and sanitization industry have a reputation as being quite closed-minded. I wouldn't say all of it, but it's been very refreshing getting to know you, Doug, because you do have kind of this expansive vision and you're pushing innovation, I think, which is very much needed. There are so many gaps and holes in some of the current protocols out there that we're, and I wouldn't even say we have all the answers completely yet ourselves. We're all figuring it out, but it's been good to get to know someone like you, where you're where you're open-minded, you're pushing the innovation, trying to figure out better ways each day to improve the mold remediation protocols out there. So hats off to you, and to many more years as we try and navigate this world and figure out how to make homes healthier. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, Jeremy. I think we got a big market out there. I always tell people the only people who need what we have to offer are people who breathe. And so I think
that is true.
I think we're going to have a big market for a very, very long time.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Doug.
Thanks for joining and for your expertise. I learned some good stuff today. I do need to learn more about HVACs, and that's something I should put on my to-do list. So thanks for your time, Doug.
Thank you, guys.
Okay.
We'll be in touch.
We'll catch up down the road. All right. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Mold Matters podcast. Be sure to subscribe for more in-depth information on mold illness and recovery.